The Living Building Challenge requires net zero water, and by the way, the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, has plans in which they are working on a thing called net zero water. So people are beginning to think about how to do this. And the idea is that you don't import any net water. Whatever amount you use is the amount you put back. Here's a formula from the U.S. Department of Energy. Basic idea is you get your water from alternative sources, and any water that you import from other places, like fresh water, you put back by infiltrating, managing stormwater, and so forth. This approach relies heavily on alternative sources, and there are a whole bunch of them. We've talked about harvesting rainwater. We can infiltrate stormwater. There are all kinds of gray water sources that come off of buildings, from foundation pumps, gray water, condensate from air cooling, and reclaimed wastewater. As with renewable energy, where your first step is to reduce demand and do energy efficiency, with water, your first step is to reduce demand, do water conservation, and promote water efficiency. Then after you've done that, you've got your demand down, then you go look for alternative sources and see what else you can do. You will see that planners and designers have to be very methodical about their planning. They start with a thing called the water balance, where they look at the balance between what water is coming in, including rain, groundwater, and surface water, and what water do they use. And in the water balance, they balance what is coming in and what is going out. And because water coming in, such as from rainwater, doesn't necessarily correlate with when you need water, a net zero water system is going to require storage, cisterns and tanks and that sort of thing. Here's a building for NASA in Florida that uses storage for its net zero water system. So then the designer or planner makes a water budget with numbers, and our goal is to be completely self-sufficient over the long term, so not depend on water coming in from outside. And the planner will collect data on all kinds of stuff related to water. How many gallons per day are you using? How many gallons per day does each kind of use need? How many gallons per day do you get from other sources? And so on and so forth. And then you calculate what is your demand, what are your alternative sources, and you see, do they come out to zero? That's why we call it net zero. So at the beginning of the term, we talked about the Living Building Challenge, and one of its petals is water. So in the Living Building Challenge, they require that you don't depend on potable water sources coming from outside. You don't depend on city water. Or if you have city water, the net input and output is zero. I think we looked at the Bullitt Center in Seattle. The Bullitt Center is an example of a Living Building Challenge, and they have net zero water. Here's a diagram at the bottom that shows rainwater coming in and being stored. They also use gray water recycling. You can see at the top here. And this room with the glass wall and the pipes is so that users can see what the water is doing and where it's going. So they use rainwater harvesting and gray water recycling. And this building uses composting toilets to minimize water use. You don't have to do that, but they chose to do that. They also have net zero energy. They did a life cycle analysis and so forth. Another case study that's large scale is Singapore, which is a city-state in Malaysia. It has a population of about 6.5 million people, and the city planners there got really serious about water. They have water problems. They have a lot of water that comes in seasonally and then other times of year not, and then they have other major demands and major problems. So their idea was a closed loop system where output from one step of the system becomes input for another step of the system, and they were very thorough about it. They include harvesting rainwater. They're serious about water conservation. They reuse their gray water. Because they're near the ocean, they also can do desalination, taking salt out of salt water. And they have a system for treating black water. They call it new water. It's a technical system that is able to treat black water to potable standards. And if you go online and do an image search, you'll see pictures of people drinking glasses of clear water that come off of the new water system. Now, a big barrier to this treating of black water to potable standards is psychology. People just do not like that idea. So one thing that the city-state does is they will, rather than just pipe this into people's houses, they have large reservoirs for storing their water supply, and they will filter small bits of treated new water back into the reservoirs, so it's highly diluted, and people seem to be okay with that. And finally, part of their plan involves watershed restoration. A lot of their water falls as rain and falls over land that has been either polluted or covered in concrete and steel pipe, and so they're very serious about working on that. At some point, I think we're going to talk about the Bishan River restoration, where they took a concrete channel next to some public housing, and they totally turned it into a beautiful park with fish and dragonflies and trees that the residents can use. So the whole city-state island is working on green infrastructure to protect their water quality. Very interesting total system. And here are a few resources for you. Here's the Bishan Park restoration, Living Building Challenge, and then some other sources.